Thank you for joining me in learning about Christian Petersen and his art dealing with the theme of war. My name is Allison Sheridan, and I'm the Collections Manager and Publications Coordinator with University Museums at Iowa State University. Christian Petersen has often been called the gentle sculptor, especially by his first biographer, Patricia Bliss. Much of Petersen's best-known work, like The Gentle Doctor, deals with themes of healing, education, productivity, and peace. And yet, Petersen was not entirely a gentle person. He was a man of strong emotion who could express anger and outrage. Dr. Leah DeLong, art historian and Petersen biographer, stated, "Like many artists, Petersen could reshape his disgust or anger into a form that could communicate his feelings. He felt a personal obligation to do so and believed that conveying a sense of suffering and sacrifice was a role that he, as an artist, could fill during wartime and afterwards." It was because of war experienced in the past, and the fear of war in the future, that Petersen's parents decided to emigrate from Denmark to the United States. This early introduction to threats and damage of war most certainly shaped Petersen's future. He began his career in the 19-teens as a die cutter, engraving designs into steel from which molds could be made for the manufacture of small metal objects such as medallions, silverware, and jewelry. Petersen's Doughboy of World War I, seen here, gives some idea of the fervor in which the United States entered the war and the self-image of the American role in the conflict. The soldier, or doughboy, uses the bayonet of his rifle to spear a dragon under whose claws lies a woman. The dragon can be read as the symbol of Germany, and its victim was likely interpreted as the innocent victims of its aggression, notably the civilians of Belgium. The Liberty, Justice, Peace, Honor Medallion of 1919 is a medal awarded by the town of North Attleboro, Massachusetts, to its veterans of the World War. The dates Petersen inscribed, 1917 and 1919, represent the year America entered the war and the year most of the soldiers actually got back home. The surrounding words of liberty, justice, peace, and honor are surely the things Americans felt they were fighting for during World War I, and which characterized the American way of waging war. The winged figure, holding a sprig of laurel leaves on the front of the medal, is a personification of victory, and the landscape behind her represents the battlefields of Northern Europe. The back of the medal holds a blank space where the name of the veteran receiving it would have been engraved. The General John Pershing Medal was designed in 1918 by Christian Petersen and later cast by Whitehead and Hoag in 1938. A series of medals designed by Petersen were later adapted, namely for the American Legion. You see, Athena, the American Legion medal, was designed in 1915, but not cast until 1945 by the Robbins Company of Attleboro, Massachusetts. The medal depicts the Greek goddess Athena holding a branch with an owl on a pile of books and a lamp on a pedestal. The next medal for the American Legion was designed in 1920s and cast by 1926 by the same firm, Robbins Company, in Attleboro, Massachusetts. This circular medal features a woman holding a torch in one hand, a laurel leaf in the other. A winged shoe is on the lower left corner. Above the shoe is the enameled symbol of the American Legion. The last medal for the American Legion was designed in the 1920s and cast in the 1930s by Robbins Company. This medal features a woman holding a torch in one hand and a laurel leaf in the other. A bird or griffin with spread wings is in the lower left corner. Above the griffin is the enameled symbol of the American Legion. In one of his first departures from smaller medallic work, The Brute Force of War of 1915 is a sculpture of a hulking monster of war having beaten down a peasant. War has seized the peasant's wife by the throat. She pleads for mercy on her knees, back arched in suffering. The Brute Force of War is accepted in a competition with the theme of war for the Friends of Young Artists, chaired by Mrs. Harry Payne Whitney at the Reinhardt Galleries in New York City. The subject of war was chosen by noted American artist Daniel Chester French. Competitors, including a young Petersen, were given 3 weeks to execute their vision. Newspapers from the East Coast to Minneapolis covered the exhibition, and an image of Petersen's sculptures was often featured. By 1916, it is clear that Petersen was trying to branch out from his die cutting and establish himself as a different sort of artist. The Attleboro War Chest, also shows Peterson's eagerness to advance the local acknowledgement of his new role as a sculptor rather than a die cutter. Like most Americans, the citizens of Attleboro, Massachusetts, were zealous in their support of troops sent to aid the Allies fighting in the trenches of France. Attleboro began a drive to collect money for the war effort in May of 1918, calling it the Attleboro War Chest. To make this point clearer, an actual small structure in the shape of a treasure chest was constructed so that everyone could gauge the progress of the fundraising. Peterson's bas-relief depicts a battlefield scene in France in which an American doughboy, gun in hand, signals for help for a wounded comrade who slumps on the ground, leaning against the standing soldier. To the rescue comes a large eagle, swooping in to the scene from overhead with wings spread wide. Peterson also created an undated World War I memorial for the Congregational Church in Attleboro, Massachusetts. The sculpture, at nearly 50 inches tall, has been newly identified as Peterson's work. The winged figure once again appears, of victory, similar to some of his die-cut designs, and holds a laurel wreath with a scroll. The base has letters in the relief, Men of Peace, Victorious in War, and the scroll contains names of Attleboro's lost soldiers. His Spanish-American War Memorial was installed in Newport, Rhode Island's Equality Park in July of 1923. As a joint commission from the city of Newport and a veterans group, Peterson's sculpture was officially entitled Victory, and is also known locally as Liberty. It is a slightly over life-size female figure dressed in classical garb, lifting a torch in her left hand, while her right holds a sword which has dropped down into a non-combative resting position. Beneath the left foot of the figure is a severed head with snake-like ropes of hair, a form that was identified in contemporary descriptions as Medusa. Collected in Peterson's papers at Special Collection, Iowa State University Library, are photographs of Peterson's rondel portraits of Marshal Ferdinand Foch of the French forces and General John Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, as well as an unidentified bust of a man in uniform. The location of these finished works of art is currently unknown. In 1919, as part of the elaborate memorial services conducted in the city of Attleboro, a relief sculpture by Peterson was also presented to the community. It was a tablet approximately 2 feet high in memory of 2 Attleboro women who had lost their lives during the war. This nurses' memorial honored Ruth Holden and Alice Haskell. The memorial is currently unlocated. A veteran organization, plus the city of New Bedford, wished to honor their citizens who had fought in the Great War, especially the man of Battery D, a field artillery unit of the famed 26th, or Yankee, Division, and they planned to install it at a prominent intersection. This proposed memorial to the Great War was a subject that had already engaged Peterson artistically, though on a much smaller scale in his studio sculptures such as War and Tablets. And it was a chance to demonstrate that his days as a commercial die cutter were over. It was to be New Bedford, Massachusetts' first monument to World War I, and Peterson surely hoped that it would secure his reputation and lead to more opportunities. The veterans of Battery D chose Sergeant Warren M. Frank to serve as a model for Peterson's sculpture. The sculpture was unveiled and dedicated in 1924. In addition to World War I and the Spanish-American War, Peterson also explored the theme of the Civil War. Civil War is a 1922 plaster rondel of 2 Civil War-era soldiers in Union uniforms. One soldier kneels in the grass with his rifle pointed up. The second soldier is standing to his left with a gun in hand. This work of art is privately owned. Later, likely in the 1940s, Peterson would create this rough sketch depicting Civil War soldiers in battle. A soldier statue of 1926 to 1928 is known from notes discovered during the research in Gorham Company's archives at Brown University. The original plaster was cast in bronze by Gorham's Bronze Division. The sculpture is listed at 23.5 inches high, though we have no picture. This sculpture, both the plaster and the bronze cast, is currently unlocated. With the completion of the Battery D Memorial on the heels of his Spanish-American War Memorial, both for prominent cities in 2 states, Peterson must have felt that his sculptural career was about to prosper and his ambitions were on the verge of being realized. However, the Battery D Memorial was the last major monumental sculpture he would produce for a decade. Only after he had left the East Coast and moved to Iowa, where he eventually joined Grant Wood and the New Deal's Public Works of Art project, would Peterson create anything on the scale of a public monument. In 1932, into a heightened awareness of veterans and their issues, Christian Peterson introduced his own hopes for recognition with his proposal to the Iowa American Legion for a war memorial, a sculpture now known as Carry On. Peterson's Great War Monument was described as the figure of a mortally wounded soldier who, with his last effort, offers his torch to another. Inscribed would be, "To you from falling hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high," from In Flanders Field by Canadian poet and soldier John McCrae. The American Legion insignia would be beside the inscription. This sculpture received regional press in Iowa, however the model is currently unlocated and the memorial was never realized. The chronology of Peterson's sculptures relating to World War II is not clear in every instance, but it is possible that his earliest response was the bust-length figure, Old Woman in Prayer, or the Refugee, currently installed in the Iowa State University's Parks Library. Though this sculpture appears at first to be a religious one, religion is only part of the story. A broadly carved form in limestone with a roughened surface that retains the sense of the stone's grain, it reflects the stylistic change of the past decade and is less detailed than most of his work of the 1920s. The marks left from the chisel and other sculpting tools are undisguised, and the artist makes little attempt to finish the surface. Most of his World War I sculpture is clearly indebted to 19th century sources, while this work of art, as well as another one of about the same time, War or After the Blitz War, seem to have left that century behind and embraced the 20th. War, After the Blitz War, Nude Woman, is a circa 1940s drawing, a study for what would become the sculpture War, After the Blitz War. War, which is owned by the Fisher Community Center of Marshalltown, Iowa, depicts a cringing young woman holding an infant as she looks back over her left shoulder. The sense of pursuit and flight are strongly expressed in this woman's protective will for the safety of the child. Both sculptures, Old Woman in Prayer and War, are representational, narrative, and are certainly on the conservative end of the scale, but they are undoubtedly 20th century works of art. To summarize Peterson's stylistic change, it is more modern, at least in form, if not in subject matter. His post-war work of 1950s, it is sometimes difficult to tell if Peterson's sculptures, drawings, or proposals are religious subjects or war memorials. By that time, they are probably both, since his feelings about war and his religious zeal overlapped in his later years. Old Woman at Prayer is the earliest in the sort in which the two themes are blended, so thoroughly that only information outside the sculptural form itself, such as a title or a comment, establishes that both war and religion are involved. With the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States joined the Allies and declared war on the Axis powers. For their greeting card, That Unhappy Christmas, Peterson made a linocut, which depicts the artist, his wife Charlotte, and their young daughter standing shocked and astounded before a pedestal containing a globe. Men of Two Wars, Soldiers, is the preliminary drawing by Peterson for what would develop into further drawings and sculptures. In this next sculpture, dated the same year of 1942, and expanding on the themes of fallen soldier and World War I as seen in Carry On, Peterson created Men of Two Wars, in which a GI of World War II is added to the general composition. Peterson was perhaps thinking of the hundreds of former Iowa State students who were serving in the armed forces. He may also have been pondering his own history and the sculptures he had done in the past about the First World War. In what may be a unique subject in American sculpture of the time, he portrayed the connection and continuity of the two 20th century world wars. This sculpture is in the Christian Peterson collection at university museums. Peterson's next war sculpture, completed about 2 years later in 1944, proved to have an even stronger effect on viewers. Price of Victory depicts an American soldier as he is wounded and begins to sink to the ground. The effect is that he has been in combat, and his momentum and life force have been stopped. At some point in 1944 and 1945, the sculpture was placed in the Memorial Union on ISU's campus, but only for a short time. Enough people found it upsetting that the Union was forced to take it off display, as reported in the student paper in August 1945. Still another recent addition and creation of the Iowa State sculptor is the figure of an American soldier being hit by shell fire and slumping to the earth. Fashioned in pale green, the statue was exhibited in the Memorial Union for a short time, but it was necessary to remove it because it was causing sadness to too many people. Peterson reports. Peterson's reply to the reception of the statue received was that it was the finest possible compliment he could receive, that his expression of American youth falling on the battlefield was effective. It apparently was not publicly displayed again until 1963, in the early days of the Vietnam War, when a group of interested students brought the statue out of storage, as reported by the student newspaper. Peterson did not fight in either World War I or II, though it is possible that, like many Americans during those times, he did attempt to enlist. Despite his dislike for war and his focus on its loss and tragedy, there is no reason to think that Peterson was a pacifist. Certain of his works from World War I show an unquestioning support for the fight against Germany. They even adopt the common viewpoint of the time that America's participation was justified and glorious. By World War II, his view became less triumphant and more circumspect, but there is no doubt of his absolute faith in the necessity of the struggle against the Axis powers. Dr. DeLong notes, his post-war designs express war's viciousness, injustice, and sorrow. Perhaps there is even a note of its endless futility. But it is still not possible to say that Peterson embraced pacifism. It is possible, perhaps more correct to say, that he was hopeful, fervently hopeful, that war's true cost could be recognized. Later in life, he became even more fervent, as his participation and experience in a religious conversion, not long after World War II, brought chaos and destruction beyond imagination. When World War II was over, his anger and distress did not abate, and his drawings suggest that he spent a considerable amount of time designing war memorials. He seems almost obsessed with the idea of a monument that would express the sorrow of loss of war. Never its glory, and certainly no mention of victory. Along with the memories of war and the post-atomic world, there is another tragedy that runs beneath the surface. None of these war memorials were ever built, commissioned, or even seriously considered. Scores of drawings left behind indicate that Peterson never stopped thinking about the large public monuments he wanted to do and was capable of doing. As he neared old age, having witnessed the carnage of World War II and the anxieties of post-war atomic age, Peterson converted to Roman Catholicism. Exactly what provoked this important decision isn't known, though family influences were surely paramount. Peterson entered his new Christian life with the zeal of a convert, and his allegiance seemed to color many of his reactions. His embrace of Christianity began to fuse with his feelings about war, and it was not always clear whether his sculptural proposals were about war or about religion. One example of the blending of the two themes is Christ with Bound Hands, a 1945 figure which he explores in numerous drawings and then modeled into several versions. The exact evolution of the idea isn't known for certain, but the sculpture's genesis should be seen as in context of World War II. Peterson seemed to have begun with the concept of a masculine Christ as he stands before Pilate in the trial prior to crucifixion. Though his hands are tied together at the waist, Christ is a well-muscled figure who betrays no fear or submission. Peterson incorporated this figure into several designs that appear to be proposals for war memorials. Unknown Prisoner Preparatory Study of 1944 and Studies for Unknown Prisoner of 1950 are studies for a resulting sculptural proposal. In another sculpture, which seems directly reflective of World War II, Peterson composed this figure with hands affixed to a cross-shaped slab, but positioned him with his back to the viewer. Calling his realized sculpture Unknown Prisoner, he imitated a connection to Christ's crucifixion. Among the possible interpretations of both sculptures, it can surely be said that Peterson lamented the horrific injustice of war and specifically the sacrifice of millions of innocents. Unknown Prisoner depicts a man hung by his wrists against a broad cross-shaped slab. He hangs with his face to the wall, and from the back he is nude through a drapery descends in front by a belt around his waist. Legs bent at the knee and feet trailing along the base, there is no longer support of his own weight. The figure appears either unconscious or dead. In any case, exhaustion or mistreatment have robbed his body of resistance. Assuming that the title, Unknown Prisoner, originated with the artist, this image should not be seen as narrowly religious, but it is a political and, more importantly, humanitarian statement. Peterson associated war more completely with tragedy, and perhaps came to see warfare as not just a crime against humanity, but against God as well. Dr. DeLong states, For Peterson, among the victims of human warfare was Christ himself, along with his message of love and goodness. It was not common to imagine the Creator as a captive of evil, but Peterson took that approach. The 1944 drawing War Memorial Monument, Woman Looking at Helmet and Sword of the Mid-1940s, and Woman in a Cloak, a Charcoal on Paper, and the 1950 Plasticine Model for War Memorial, all incorporate female figures in an effort to symbolize the sacrifice on the home front. In one 1950s drawing, Peterson took his Bound Christ drawings a step further by adding the phrase, "all the evils which have kept him prisoner," thereby suggesting that what actually binds Christ's power is the evil of the surrounding world, and this particular evil of war. Peterson seems to offer Christ as a symbol of the suffering of the innocent, but at the same time, this Christ may also express anger at a humanity which cannot be dissuaded from engaging in warfare. Throughout his life, Christian Peterson maintained his ties to the Danish-American community. He was particularly a friend of August Bang, a publisher of Danish-language newspaper and other materials, including Julegranen, a lavishly illustrated magazine that came out at Christmas time. From 1947 to 1950, Peterson designed the covers of this magazine, and in 1950 he also contributed 2 illustrations for a short story about a Midwestern Danish immigrant family during World War II. The Yellow Envelope by Jens Christian Bay is the tale of a young soldier, Peter, whose family anxiously awaits his letter from the various war zones where he is fighting, and dreads the possibility that one day they will receive a yellow envelope announcing his death on the battlefield. These 4 drawings by Peterson illustrate Bay's story. Overall, the gentle sculptor was like many artists, addressing the current events of their time. It just so happens that Peterson saw 2 of the world's most massive and widespread engagements of war during his lifetime. The theme of war in Peterson's art is more deeply explored in the 2009 publication All the Evils, Christian Peterson and the Art of War by Leah Rawson DeLong and published by University Museums at Iowa State University. Please be sure to see other videos in this series exploring the life, work, and legacy of Christian Peterson. Thank you.